December 1944. The Ardennes Forest. 23-year-old Private First Class Michael Chen from San Francisco had been dead for approximately 6 hours when his body killed 3 more American soldiers. His corpse lay in the snow where German machine gun fire had cut him down during a dawn patrol, his blood frozen in dark patterns around him, his eyes still open and staring at the gray winter sky. When his squad returned under covering fire to retrieve his body, because that's what American soldiers did, they never left their dead behind, Sergeant William Porter reached down to lift Chen's body by the shoulders. The moment Porter's hands made contact, the grenade hidden beneath Chen's body detonated. The explosion killed Porter instantly, severed the legs of Private James Rodriguez, who had been helping with the recovery, and sent shrapnel into the face of Corporal Thomas McKinley, who had been providing cover. Rodriguez bled out in the snow before medics could reach him. McKinley survived but lost both eyes, and Michael Chen's body, already dead, was torn apart by the same explosion, ensuring there would be nothing intact left to send home to his parents in California. This wasn't an isolated incident. This wasn't a tragic accident of war. This was a deliberate German tactic that had begun appearing with increasing frequency as Allied forces pushed deeper into German territory. The booby trapping of American corpses, turning dead soldiers into weapons against their own comrades, exploiting the one thing that the German command knew American forces would never abandon: their commitment to recovering their fallen. By the time the reports reached General George S. Patton's headquarters, over 40 American soldiers had been killed or maimed by booby-trapped bodies of their own dead comrades. 40 families would receive telegrams saying their sons or husbands had died not in combat, but while trying to give another fallen soldier a decent burial. 40 men who had survived German bullets and artillery, only to be killed by German cruelty hidden beneath American corpses. When Patton read the initial intelligence report, sitting at his desk in a commandeered Belgian tow, his aide later recalled that the general went absolutely still for nearly a minute, his eyes fixed on the page, his jaw working silently. Then he stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the snowy landscape for another long moment before he spoke. "Get me the names," he said quietly, his voice so calm that it was somehow more terrifying than if he had shouted. Every American soldier killed by a booby-trapped body. Their names, their hometowns, their units, and get me the intelligence reports on which German units are responsible for this practice. His aide hesitated. "Sir, intelligence is fragmentary. It appears to be happening across multiple sectors, possibly different German units. Then get me all of it," Patton interrupted, still staring out the window. "Every report, every incident, every scrap of information we have. And then get me to the Judge Advocate General's office on a secure line. I want to know the exact legal status of booby-trapping enemy dead under the Geneva Convention." The aide hurried to comply, and Patton remained at the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Officers who knew him well recognized this posture. It meant the general was thinking, calculating, planning something that would likely be both brilliant and controversial. What they didn't know yet was that Patton was about to implement a response so psychologically devastating, so precisely calibrated to strike at the heart of German military culture, that it would become one of the most debated decisions of his command. Over the next 72 hours, as more reports came in and the scale of the booby trapping became clear, Patton assembled his senior staff for a meeting that would last nearly 4 hours. He laid out the situation with characteristic bluntness. "Gentlemen, the Germans have decided that our compassion is a weakness to be exploited. They have turned our duty to our dead into a weapon against us. They have calculated, correctly, that American soldiers will risk their lives to recover their fallen comrades, and they are using that knowledge to kill more Americans. This is not a military tactic. This is not legitimate warfare. This is a violation of every code of military conduct, and it will stop." Today, Colonel Edward Harrison, Patton's chief of staff, spoke up, "Sir, we've already distributed warnings to all units about checking bodies for booby traps before recovery. We've trained explosive ordnance teams to—" "That's defensive." Patton cut him off. "That's reacting to their tactics. I don't defend, Colonel. We're going to make the Germans regret ever conceiving of this practice. We're going to make it so costly, so painful, so personally devastating to them that no German commander will ever order it again. He walked to a map of their operational area, marked with pins showing where booby-trapped bodies had been discovered. Here's what I've learned from the JAG office. The Geneva Convention explicitly prohibits booby-trapping the dead. It's classified as a war crime, specifically because it violates the protected status of the deceased and medical personnel, which means every German soldier who booby-traps an American body and every officer who orders or permits this practice is a war criminal by the explicit terms of international law. He turned back to his assembled officers. So here's what we're going to do. Every time we capture a German position where we have evidence that bodies were booby-trapped, we are going to identify the responsible German unit. We are going to make it known to German prisoners from that unit that their comrades committed war crimes. And then we are going to give them a choice. The room went quiet as Patton laid out his plan, and as he spoke, several officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. What Patton was proposing was legally sound but morally complex, psychologically brutal but precisely targeted. It would force German soldiers to confront the consequences of their commander's decisions in the most personal way possible. It would turn the tables on the psychological warfare the Germans had been waging. And it would send a message that would echo through the German military faster than any radio broadcast or propaganda leaflet. Before we go any further into what Patton ordered, we need you to pause right here and engage with us. Drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching this from. Are you in the United States, Europe, Asia, somewhere else? Because this story, this moment when American forces had to decide how to respond to a war crime that exploited their own humanity, this is history that demands we grapple with difficult moral questions. If you want more stories like this, authentic, unflinching accounts of World War II that explore not just what happened, but the moral complexity of how men made impossible decisions, then hit that subscribe button right now. Smash the like button if you're already gripped by this story. And here's what we really need to know. After you hear what Patton did, comment below with your honest opinion. Did he make the right choice? Or did he go too far? Was his response justice or revenge? There's no easy answer, and that's exactly why this story matters. We're going to explore every angle of what happened, and we want to hear your perspective from wherever you are in the world. Now, let's get back to that meeting room and find out exactly what Patton ordered his forces to do in response to the booby-trapping of American dead. Patton's plan was as simple as it was devastating. Every German prisoner captured from a unit confirmed to have booby-trapped American bodies will be assigned to graves registration duty, he announced to his staff. They will be required to recover, identify, and properly bury both American and German dead from the battlefield. They will treat everybody with respect due to fallen soldiers. They will dig graves, conduct burials, and maintain records. And they will do this work under close supervision, unarmed, in the same areas where their units planted those booby traps. The implications settled over the room like a heavy fog. Colonel Harrison was the first to speak. Sir, you're going to make them recover the same bodies their comrades booby-trapped? Make them face the possibility that they might trigger explosives planted by their own side? Patton's expression was granite. Exactly. If German soldiers want to turn corpses into weapons, then German soldiers can deal with the consequences. Let them experience the same fear our men feel every time they try to recover a fallen comrade. Let them wonder if the next body they touch might be rigged to explode. Let them understand, intimately and personally, what their commanders have subjected our troops to. Another officer raised a concern, sir. The Germans might see this as forcing prisoners into dangerous labor, which could be a Geneva Convention violation on our part. Patton had clearly anticipated this objection. The Geneva Convention requires that prisoner labor not be dangerous, degrading, or related to military operations. Graves registration is none of those things. It's humanitarian work, it's respectful treatment of the dead, and it's explicitly protected under international law. The only thing that makes it dangerous is the German military's own illegal practice of booby-trapping bodies. If German prisoners are endangered while doing this work, it's because of German war crimes, not American mistreatment. He paused, letting that sink in. Furthermore, we're going to document everything. Every German prisoner assigned to grave duty will be photographed, interviewed, and asked explicitly if they knew their unit was booby-trapping bodies. Those interviews will be recorded and preserved as evidence for war crimes tribunals. Any German soldier who admits knowledge of the practice will be segregated and charged as an accessory to war crimes. Any who claim ignorance will still perform the grave's duty, because even if they didn't know, their comrades did, and they're going to help clean up the mess. The plan was implemented within 48 hours. The first group of German prisoners assigned to graves registration duty came from the 12th SS Panzer Division, a unit that intelligence had confirmed was responsible for booby-trapping at least 7 American bodies in the Ardennes sector. 32 German soldiers, including 2 junior officers, were assembled under guard and informed of their assignment. The American captain in charge of the detail, a graves registration officer named Robert Chen, cousin of Michael Chen, whose booby-trapped body had killed 3 Americans, read them their orders in fluent German. You will recover and properly bury all bodies, American and German, from the Malmedy sector. You will treat everybody with respect. You will check everybody for booby traps using the procedures we will teach you. If you find explosives, you will mark the location and call for ordnance disposal. You will dig graves, conduct burials, and maintain accurate records. This duty will continue until all bodies in this sector have been recovered and properly interred. One of the German officers, an SS lieutenant named Wolfgang Steiner, spoke up with barely concealed contempt. This is a violation of the Geneva Convention. Prisoners cannot be forced into dangerous labor. Captain Chen's response was ice cold. You're right that it's dangerous, Lieutenant. It's dangerous because your division booby trapped American bodies. One of those bodies was my cousin, Private First Class Michael Chen. The explosion that killed him also killed Sergeant William Porter, Private James Rodriguez, and blinded Corporal Thomas McKinley. So yes, it's dangerous work. But it's only dangerous because of what your side did. If you have a problem with that, I suggest you take it up with whichever of your officers ordered bodies to be booby-trapped in the first place. The color drained from Steiner's face as the full implications hit him. These German soldiers were going to have to approach bodies, potentially including their own dead comrades, with the knowledge that any of them might explode at the slightest touch. They would experience the same fear, the same terrible calculation that American soldiers had been facing. The same question that had plagued every American graves registration team. Is this body safe, or is it a trap? Is recovering this fallen soldier an act of respect, or a death sentence? The first day of graves duty was supervised by American combat engineers trained in explosive ordnance disposal. The German prisoners were taught how to carefully check for tripwires, pressure plates, and hidden grenades. They were given long poles to gently probe beneath bodies before touching them. They were instructed to work slowly, methodically, assuming every body was potentially rigged until proven otherwise. And then they were sent out to recover the dead. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. These were hardened SS troops, veterans of brutal combat on the Eastern Front, men who had seen and done terrible things without flinching. But approaching the frozen corpse of a German soldier, knowing it might have been booby-trapped by their own comrades, knowing that the standard practice they had tolerated or participated in might now kill them, that broke through their combat-hardened exterior in a way that conventional interrogation never could. The first body they approached was a German Wehrmacht soldier, frozen in the snow, half buried in a shell crater. Following the procedures they'd been taught, 2 German prisoners carefully probed around and beneath the body with long poles. Their hands were shaking. Other prisoners watched from a safe distance, and several were openly praying. When one of the poles struck something metallic beneath the body, everyone froze. An American odd technician moved forward carefully and discovered a German stick grenade wedged under the corpse's back, pin partially pulled, positioned so that lifting the body would complete the pull and detonate the explosive. Your own people did this, the American technician said to the German prisoners as he carefully disarmed the grenade. This is a German soldier, and your own side turned him into a bomb. How many of your own dead have you left out here rigged to kill anyone who tries to bury them with dignity? The question hung in the cold air, unanswered, but the impact on the German prisoners was visible. Several looked physically ill. Wolfgang Steiner, the SS lieutenant who had complained about Geneva Convention violations, sat down heavily in the snow, his face in his hands. Over the next 3 days, the German prisoners recovered 43 bodies from that sector, 17 American, 26 German. Of those 43, 11 were booby-trapped. 7 were American bodies rigged with grenades or mines. But 4 were German bodies, turned into posthumous weapons by their own side, left to kill whoever tried to give them a proper burial. That discovery, that the Germans had booby-trapped their own dead as well as American casualties, shattered whatever moral justification the prisoners might have clung to. This wasn't tactical necessity or legitimate warfare. This was indiscriminate cruelty that didn't even spare their own fallen comrades. On the 4th day, Lieutenant Steiner requested to speak with Captain Chen privately. When they met, with an American guard present, Steiner's arrogance had completely evaporated. "Captain," he said in English, "I need to tell you something. I need it on record." Chen pulled out a notebook. "Go ahead, Lieutenant." "I knew," Steiner said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I knew my unit was booby-trapping bodies. I never questioned it. I never objected. We were told it was necessary to slow the American advance, to make you pay a price for every meter of ground. We were told that Americans were soft, that they would be paralyzed by fear of their own death, that it would break your morale." He looked up, meeting Chen's eyes. "I never thought about what it meant. I never pictured the men who would die trying to recover their friends. I never imagined having to approach those bodies myself, having to wonder if my own comrades had turned corpses into bombs. And I certainly never thought that we would do the same thing to our own dead." Chen wrote steadily, recording every word. "Why are you telling me this, Lieutenant?" "Because it needs to stop," Steiner said with sudden intensity. "Because I have been out there for 3 days, approaching bodies of men I might have known, men who died fighting for Germany, and I have had to treat each one like an enemy trap. I have had to be afraid of my own death. And if there is any justice in this world, the officers who ordered this practice should experience the same thing. They should have to walk those fields. They should have to wonder which body will explode." Chen nodded slowly. "Your statement will be part of the war crimes evidence. You understand that you're admitting to being an accessory?" "I understand," Steiner replied. "But I am also telling you that I can identify other soldiers who participated, and more importantly, I can identify the officers who gave the orders. If you want to stop this practice, you need to go after the commanders, not just the soldiers who followed orders." This was exactly what Patton had anticipated. The Graves registration duty wasn't just punishment, it was an interrogation technique, more effective than any aggressive questioning could have been. By making German soldiers personally confront the consequences of their commander's decisions, by forcing them to experience the same fear and moral corruption that the booby-trapping created, Patton had found a way to break through the wall of military discipline and just following orders' justifications. Within 2 weeks, 23 German prisoners had given similar statements, providing detailed information about which units practiced booby-trapping, which officers ordered it, and in some cases, which specific soldiers had actually rigged the explosives. The intelligence windfall was enormous, providing evidence that would be used in post-war trials. But more importantly, word spread through German prisoner of war camps like wildfire. If you were captured from a unit that booby-trapped bodies, you would be assigned to Graves duty, and you would face the possibility of being killed by your own side's booby traps. The psychological impact of this knowledge rippled through German forces still fighting. And then Patton did something that elevated his response from tactical brilliance to strategic psychological warfare. Patton ordered that the German prisoners' statements be compiled, translated, and distributed. Not just to Allied command, but to German forces still fighting. American psychological warfare units prepared leaflets that contained direct quotes from German soldiers describing what it was like to approach booby-trapped bodies of their own comrades. These leaflets were dropped by the thousands over German positions, printed in clear German text with photographs of German prisoners conducting graves registration duty. The headline on the leaflet was stark and devastating. Your officers turn your dead into bombs, then send you to disarm them. Below that, excerpts from Lieutenant Steiner's statement and others, I approached the body of a German soldier I had fought beside for 2 years. I had to check him for explosives planted by our own side. This is what our commanders have reduced us to, fearing our own dead, treating our fallen brothers as enemy traps. Another quote, from an 18-year-old German private, they told us booby-trapping American bodies would slow their advance. They never told us they were doing the same thing to our own dead. They never told us that when we die, they might turn our bodies into weapons instead of giving us an honorable burial. What kind of army does this to its own soldiers? The impact of these leaflets on German morale was catastrophic. German soldiers, already fighting a losing war, already exhausted and demoralized, now had to confront the possibility that their own command structure viewed them as expendable even in death. The sacred compact between soldier and army, that your service would be honored, that your sacrifice would be respected, that at minimum you would be buried with dignity, had been violated by their own side. Reports from interrogations of newly captured German soldiers revealed that the leaflets had sparked something close to mutiny in several units. Soldiers refused to participate in booby-trapping operations. Junior officers questioned their superiors about the practice. In at least 3 documented cases, German soldiers surrendered to American forces, specifically citing the leaflets, saying they would rather be prisoners of an army that respected the dead than continue serving commanders who turned corpses into weapons. But Patton wasn't finished. He ordered that every German officer captured who had commanded units confirmed to have booby-trapped bodies be segregated from regular prisoners and charged with war crimes. Not just flagged for future prosecution, but actively charged, with formal proceedings initiated while the war was still ongoing. The message was clear. This wasn't something that would be sorted out after the war. This wasn't going to be forgotten in the chaos of surrender and occupation. German officers responsible for this practice would face immediate justice. The first such trial took place in February 1945, even as fighting continued across the front. A German captain named Ernst Weber, captured outside of Bastogne, was brought before a military tribunal. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Testimony from his own soldiers that he had personally ordered bodies to be booby-trapped, documentation of 8 American deaths resulting from those booby traps, and physical evidence, including unexploded ordnance recovered from bodies in his sector. Weber's defense was the predictable claim. He was following orders from higher command. It was standard practice. The Americans themselves used questionable tactics. But the prosecution, led by a U.S. Army JAG officer named Major Sarah Cohen, systematically dismantled every argument. Captain Weber, she stated in her closing argument, "You are not charged with following orders. You are charged with war crimes, specifically the desecration of the dead and the deployment of illegal weapons designed to kill medical and grave registration personnel. The Geneva Convention, which Germany is a signatory to, explicitly prohibits both practices. Your defense that this was standard practice is not a defense at all. It is an admission that your entire unit, and potentially your entire command structure, was engaged in systematic war crimes." She held up photographs of the American soldiers killed by Weber's booby traps. Sergeant William Porter, killed recovering the body of his squad mate. Private James Rodriguez, bled out in the snow while trying to give a fallen comrade a decent burial. These men died not in combat, but while performing a humanitarian duty protected under international law. You turned that protected duty into a death trap. That is not warfare, Captain. That is murder. Weber was convicted and sentenced to 20 years hard labor. But more importantly, the trial was documented, photographed, and publicized. German forces still fighting received the message. Officers who ordered booby trapping of bodies would face trial and conviction, not someday in the abstract future, but now, immediately, with sentences that would consume decades of their lives. The combination of Patton's tactics, forcing German prisoners to personally confront the consequences through grave duty, publicizing their statements to demoralize still fighting units, and immediately prosecuting responsible officers, achieved what conventional military responses could not. Within 6 weeks of the policy's implementation, intelligence reports confirmed that booby trapping of bodies had virtually ceased across Third Army's operational area. German units that had routinely practiced it stopped. Officers who might have ordered it decided the risk wasn't worth it. And in the final months of the war, as Germany's collapse accelerated, American casualties from booby-trapped bodies in Third Army sectors dropped to nearly zero. But perhaps the most profound impact was on the German prisoners themselves. The graves registration duty, initially conceived as both punishment and intelligence gathering, became something else entirely, a forced moral reckoning. German soldiers who had participated in or tolerated the booby-trapping practice found themselves literally digging graves for the consequences of their commander's decisions. They handled American bodies with the respect they should have been given in the first place. They discovered booby traps planted by their own comrades. They felt the fear that American soldiers had been experiencing. And many of them, like Lieutenant Steiner, emerged from that experience fundamentally changed. Captain Robert Chen kept a journal of his experiences supervising the graves registration details, and his entries from those months reveal the complex moral terrain Patton's policy created. March 3rd, 1945, today a German prisoner named Franz, maybe 19 years old, broke down while digging a grave for an American soldier. He said the American was the same age as his brother, who died on the Eastern Front. He said he hoped someone buried his brother with the same care. I didn't know what to say to him. Is this justice? Is this revenge? Is this just war being war, finding new ways to break men regardless of which side they're on? Another entry, March 15, 1945, Lieutenant Steiner asked if he could write a letter to the family of Sergeant Porter, the man killed by a booby trap his unit placed. I asked him what he would possibly say. He said that their son died because officers like me didn't have the courage to refuse immoral orders. That I am sorry. That it won't bring him back, but that I will spend the rest of my life making sure people know what happens when soldiers abandon their humanity. I approved the letter. Sergeant Porter's widow received it 3 months later. She wrote back. I don't know what she said, but Steiner carried her response with him for the rest of his time as a prisoner. These weren't the outcomes that Patton had necessarily planned for, but they revealed something about his strategic insight. He understood that defeating Germany wasn't just about destroying its military capacity. It was about destroying the moral framework that had allowed ordinary soldiers to participate in extraordinary atrocities. By forcing German soldiers to confront the human cost of their actions, not through lectures or propaganda, but through direct, physical, emotionally devastating experience. Patton had found a way to break through the defensive rationalizations that let men commit war crimes while telling themselves they were just following orders. When the war in Europe ended in May 1945, the graves registration details continued. German prisoners who had been assigned to this duty saw it through to completion, recovering and properly burying thousands of bodies, American and German alike. Many of them requested to continue the work even after it was technically no longer required, saying it felt like the only meaningful thing they could do to make amends. And in the decades that followed, several of these former German soldiers became advocates for international humanitarian law, speaking publicly about their experiences and why the rules of war matter even when, especially when, you're losing. Patton never spoke extensively about the graves registration policy in his public statements or memoirs. To him, it was simply a practical response to a tactical problem. The Germans had weaponized American respect for the dead, so he weaponized German guilt and fear to stop the practice. But those who served under him during that period recognized it as something more. A masterclass in psychological warfare that understood the fundamental truth that wars are fought by humans, and humans can be moved by forces more powerful than bullets and bombs. The final accounting was grim but clear. Before Patton's policy was implemented, Third Army was losing an average of 3 soldiers per week to booby-trapped bodies. After implementation, that number dropped to nearly 0. Approximately 180 German prisoners provided testimony that contributed to war crimes prosecutions. 17 German officers were convicted of war crimes related to booby-trapping the dead. And thousands of bodies, both American and German, were recovered and buried with the dignity that should have been theirs from the beginning, handled by German soldiers who had learned, in the hardest way possible, that there are some lines that should never be crossed, even in war. This is the story they don't tell you in simplified histories of World War II, not the clean narrative of good versus evil, but the messy, morally complex reality of how you fight enemies who exploit your humanity. Patton's response to the booby-trapping of American bodies wasn't about revenge, though it certainly had elements of punishment. It was about sending a message that some tactics are so beyond the pale that they will be met with responses that force every participant to confront exactly what they've done. It was about understanding that defeating an enemy requires not just destroying their capacity to fight, but destroying their willingness to cross moral lines. And it was about recognizing that sometimes the most devastating weapon isn't a bomb or a bullet, it's forcing someone to face the truth about themselves and their choices. If this story challenged your understanding of World War II, if it made you think about the moral complexity of warfare and how commanders make impossible decisions, then we need you to take action right now. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we're bringing you these untold stories every week. The complicated, difficult, profoundly human moments that textbooks skip over because they don't fit neat narratives. Smash that like button if this story moved you or made you see history differently. And most importantly, drop a comment below with your honest reaction. Did Patton make the right choice? Was forcing German prisoners to confront booby-trapped bodies justice or cruelty? Would you have done the same in his position? Or would you have chosen a different response? We want to hear your perspective, your moral reasoning, your gut reaction from wherever you are in the world. Share this video with someone who thinks they know everything about World War II. Because stories like this, uncomfortable, morally ambiguous, deeply human stories, are the ones that reveal what history is really about. It's not just dates and battles. It's about human beings making choices under impossible pressure and living with the consequences of those choices. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one, where we'll explore another hidden chapter of history that will challenge everything you thought you knew about war, honor, and what it means to be human in humanity's darkest moments.